Good afternoon. I'm Rev Dave Thompson. I'd like to welcome you back to our Civil Human Bible study. We're continuing in Matthew chapter 18, and I'm a civil human minister. So what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. So in that effort, the way that I'm looking at the scriptures today, and my method for doing this is to try to find those teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans in a civil way. So regardless of our faith, the way we want to believe about our creeds, regardless of our politics, and regardless of the way that we want to live our lives, I believe that there are universal truths that we as humans all agree on. And so that's what I'm trying to find here in the scriptures today. So let's go ahead and jump in. It's Matthew chapter 18, starting with verse 15 to 18. Starting with verse 15. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses, every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen or a tax collector. Assuredly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Today, we're talking about how to correct somebody in our community. You may recall that yesterday, Jesus was talking about a sheep that wanders off. He uses this analogy or parable, as they call it, to communicate how it is that we should treat people who wander off. And the method for that was essentially, if somebody's wandering off, we leave our comfort, we leave our community of safety and everything that's fairly well established, and we go after the person who has wandered off. And by wandering off, it meant that somebody was choosing to do something in their lives that was going to have a really negative outcome. And so we were supposed to leave this 99, go searching, even though it's risky and dangerous for us, to go to the sheep and to find that one person, to help them to find some resolution, whether that's them continuing on or whether that's bringing them back into the community. Today, Jesus is talking about a particular instance of how to do that in real life. So he's given this analogy of what it looks like to leave and be concerned about somebody, but now he's talking about how do you actually do that in everyday society? How should his disciples go about that process? So I want to walk you through what he says there. It's fairly important, and more importantly, even some of the passages, these phrases that we read through here, some of them have been misinterpreted and applied to things that they were not at all supposed to be applied to. So I'd like to talk about those as well today. So the first thing is this: if your brother sins against you, then you need to go to your brother alone. So the word sin here, I want to talk a little bit about that. We've talked about this concept before. In our society right now and in the church, oftentimes, the word sin is this sort of ambiguous phrase. You know, people know it's a sin. Well, why is it a sin? Because it's sinful. Why is it sinful? Because it's a sin. So this is weird circular conversation that happens around what that means. And it's sort of left to our cultures or the individual church to figure that out. That's not what this word means here. The word amartano or amartia, it means it's a construct. So martia means the share or a part of the benefits of God, essentially. And is this negating participle, which means it is the opposite of the case. So what does that mean? Sin or amartia is simply this: doing something that makes it so that we will not participate in the benefits of a good decision. I think that's a really important key and a very instructional way to look at what this word actually means. And when Jesus says the word sin, he's not talking about this dark negative thing, even though it does have those connotations. He's talking in the positive element of it, in what they're missing out on, so that we don't see these people as being dark or evil in and of themselves, but instead as in making decisions that are actually going to have negative outcomes in their lives, and that will make them miss out on the goodness and happiness and fullness of life that comes from these virtues that we're talking about: compassion, mercy, peacemaking, forgiveness. And so what happens? They say first, here's the first step: go to your brother in private. This is probably the most important part of this whole passage: how to correct somebody in private. Oftentimes we jump the gun, and those who are in religious communities especially will first go to the pastor and tell the pastor what's going on, and the pastor will tell the board, and the board will tell a committee, and the committee will approach this person, when it really should have just been handled very simply by this individual going to that person. But that takes courage, and it takes humility and vulnerability to go to a person and to say, hey, you've done something to wrong me, or done something that has affected me negatively. And so what does it point out here? We're supposed to go alone and to correct them. And this word correct, it isn't just, hey, you made me upset, or hey, I think you've done something wrong. I feel like you've done something wrong. Feeling is part of it. But this word correct in this passage that Jesus is using has this connotation of proof, providing reasonable proof, a reasonable cause, a reason that they can see is truly upsetting, and that they have no other response to, except that to obviously acknowledge that they had done something wrong. Of course, at that point, a person can choose to continue to do that, or they continue to not. But a lot of the time, we end up destroying relationships in our community because we don't go privately to somebody and talk to them and show them how it is that they have wronged us. Many times we can resolve that, and we can gain our brother or sister, human being, in that process instead of alienating them. So what happens if they don't listen? That happens too. Well, the next step is to go to find 2 or 3 other people and to bring them to this brother or sister and say, hey, I don't know if you recognize this, but we're all in agreement here that you've done something wrong. Are you going to do anything to resolve that? There's a specific reason why Jesus has used the number 2 or 3. In Jewish culture, and especially with regard to their religious laws, if anybody had to do something that had to do with a legal commitment, or had to do with a judicial decision, something publicly engaging that was going to be on record, they had to have more than one person. So it wasn't a he said, she said situation. It was 2 or 3 people, 3 preferably, but 2 could be the minimum, to testify against this individual who has wronged them, in whatever way that is. And that's important. The interesting thing is that Jesus points out that wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, that everything will be established. A lot of people in the church that I grew up in a fairly conservative Pentecostal Christian background that no doubt colors my lenses to this day. But even in that realm, people would often use this verse to say that if 2 people prayed together, or 3 people prayed together, that it was solid and done, and that nobody had any recourse. And so that it was this weird notion of them praying together and that everything was set. They didn't have to do anything about it then. And that's not at all what this passage is used for, or what it's meant to be. This is talking about actually engaging a person and talking to them in real life. So what happens if they don't even reply to the brother and the 2 other persons who are trying to talk to them? Well, then they go back to the community and they tell the community what's happened. They reason it through, provide the proof of it. There has to be proof. You can't just make stuff up. And then the church replies to this person and asks them to please reconcile the situation. And at that stage, if this person has not reconciled, then Jesus says to treat them, it's translated here as a heathen or a tax collector. Matthew, actually, who's writing this passage, this book that we're reading right now, 2,000 years ago, Matthew wrote this, and Matthew was a tax collector. So no doubt he's chuckling himself about this reality that he used to be a tax collector. The word heathen there is terrible translation. It really has a whole lot of negative connotation in our world. It's really sort of a dark person who's maliciously evil person, and that's not what this word means. It means foreigner. It means somebody outside of the collective here. In other words, as far as the community is concerned, they will treat him as if he's not particularly part of their system or their governance. But it doesn't mean that this person is cut off from the world. It just simply means that he shouldn't be given the same privileges that everybody else in the community should be. And whether this is in a church or a synagogue or a temple or a mosque or a business or a nonprofit or a group of friends, these steps are vital, are very important to us as human beings. Setting aside that that's said in the Christian scriptures and that it's said by Jesus, these steps are very crucial to making sure that we as a community not only deal with wrongs that have been committed, but do it in a way that we can best save the situation, to reconcile this person. And in Jesus' whole point of this is, look how many times that have been attempted to bring this person back around and to help the situation be resolved. That's the whole focus. It's a focus on doing everything that we can to bring our brother or sister human who has done something wrong into a place that they can become part of the society or community again. And then Jesus says, however many you bind or loose in heaven will be bound and loosed, anything bound or loosed in earth will be bound and loosed in heaven. He's essentially saying this, that, if you've made a decision to consider a person outside of the community because you've tried everything you could and there's no resolve, that your decision to leave them out is something that is going to be bound in heaven. In other words, if you've gone through all this, you can count on the fact that this is a good decision and that your decision to get rid of them is beneficial not only for your community, but also the society of the world at large. There are a couple things that I would like to talk about when it comes to this passage. There are many of us who have experienced this process in an abusive way, in a way that did not provide the opportunity for us to provide our own case and to make our own statement. It has caused many people to be cast out from their society and their community for the simplest of infractions. That is not what this passage is about. This passage is not about what they've done to the community. The passage is about what they're doing to themselves. Helping somebody make good choices is what it's all about. And I know a lot of people have used this passage even in what they call spiritual warfare. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Coming from a Pentecostal background, it's this notion of us as people of God praying against the evil spirits and binding them and loosing them. And they actually use that phrase, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And so you hear this phrase, I bind you Satan, I bind you demon, and this notion that that's all they got to do, and that's how they address everything is by binding and loosing. That has absolutely nothing to do with the passage. This has everything to do with, in real life, talking to real people about real situations that really can be resolved. I want to point out also, corrections will always come. I know I have had a number of them in my own life. We have to make course corrections. Sometimes we have steered the ship into the rocks by our own neglect. Sometimes we have to listen to people who come to us and point it out. Being vulnerable, being able to recognize that we've made a bad decision is an important part to being a human being that can have a good life, to have a better life, Changing our character, changing who we are, requires us to have people in our lives to hold us accountable to these things. I know that I have some key people in my life who are holding and have held me accountable substantially. My spouse, of course, has been one of the most key ones of those. And thank you for that, Corrigan. I want to leave with this. This whole process of correction, the most important part, I feel, it has to be started in love and in concern for the individual that's being corrected. The focus is not on how we've been wronged, even though that's part of it. The focus is in looking at this individual and thinking about their lives and thinking about what their life is going to end up being and using that as the motivation. When we come at it from love, people are far more likely to listen to us when we have to offer correction to them. I want to thank you for joining me on this Bible study. Some of these passages are hard to read, even though they're written 2,000 years ago and spoken by Jesus and are oftentimes held in the confines of churches. These truths are self-evident to us as human beings. This process is a great example of how to handle correcting individuals. And I might encourage you to think about people in your life who have wronged you. Notice that the focus is actually going to reconcile that, not to leaving it to fester, but to doing something about that. And if you need to, find other people that can help you do that. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And until that time, first of all, please leave your comments in the comments below. I appreciate your reflections and your ideas and your clarifications. They not only help me, but they help others. Please subscribe to this channel on YouTube. There's a little button down here you can click. If you're on Facebook, please like the page. It's the way that we can keep in contact with one another. So until tomorrow, live at noon, I want you to know that I love you. This is the American Sign Language sign for I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love that we have any control over in this world. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.